people, today I'm going to be doing my very rambling review of the latest season of Netflix's The Witcher. I'm aware that I'm a little bit slow off the mark with this, and the season has now been out for well over 2 weeks, but I have been super busy. The day the show aired, I was at Joey Beatty's book signing, which was incredible, but very overwhelming, and then I started a new job the next day, so by the time I got a day off, I was kind of exhausted. Plus, a bunch of other stuff has been happening since then that I won't get into. I also keep getting sidetracked making fan art for the show, and yeah, it's just taken me a while. But now I'm here, and I'm super excited to talk about it because I had a really good time watching this new season. However, this review is going to be spoilery if that was not clear by the ridiculous length of the video. So if you haven't seen it yet and are worried about said spoilers, please go away and watch it first and then come back here. This review is also compromised of my own personal opinions, which you are obviously welcome to disagree with, and I'm all for constructive discussion down in the comments. Just everybody be nice to each other, and yeah, don't take my opinion as like fact. And finally, as always, I still have not gotten my microphone fixed, so I am sorry about the dreadful state of the audio. Hopefully you can forgive me. I'm hoping to get it fixed sometime in the next few months. We'll see what happens. So overall, my impressions of season four were just overwhelmingly positive. I really enjoyed watching it. I think the character dynamics and development of certain characters was absolutely phenomenal. And if you are a person who cares about this sort of thing, which I know not everybody does, this was by far the most book accurate season yet. Most of the Hansas and Ciri scenes were taken straight from the pages of the book series. I can find you the chapters in which most of it happened if you ask. And seeing them come to life on screen was just absolutely incredible. The first episode maybe felt a little bit shaky for me. It took me a while to get used to the new kind of narrative framing with Nimue, but the minute I saw that she was referencing half a decade of poetry by Julian Alfred Pancratz, I knew that this season was going to be so good. I'm going to break this review into a few sections, and I want to start by talking about Ciri and the Rats. I felt like Ciri had such a brilliantly told character arc this season. She's been through so much up to this point, and now she is completely alone. No kingdom, no family, no real identity of her own. She doesn't even know who she is. Then the rats find her, and we get to see her start to reshape herself and reshape her identity in their reflection. I know that I and a lot of people didn't really enjoy the rats section of the books too much. The rats in the books are rather one dimensional, they're vicious, they're cruel, they're nasty people. And whilst they can definitely be both destructive and cruel at times, I think the show did such a good job of humanizing them. They're not just bad people, they're teenagers who've been through hell and have been surviving alone this entire time. And they make a lot of bad choices as a result of that, but you can very much see what shaped them and how they became this way. They are initially not at all welcoming to Ciri because naturally they're scared of outsiders. But as she begins to carve herself a place amongst them, forcibly at times, we get to see them relax a little bit, and it becomes very apparent that they're just kids. They bicker like siblings, they dance and drink and play that stupid knife game with the fingers that I know everybody else I know was obsessed with when I was 14. And their stories are told in such a way that I feel like you can really sympathize with them without having to agree with everything they've done. My favourites among the rats were definitely Missile and Asa. I just liked Asa. I thought he was fun. I kind of liked his role within the group. And Missile in particular, I just think was incredible. And Christelle Elwyn, who plays her, was absolutely phenomenal in the role. Missile and Ciri's relationship is obviously a very controversial thing, and it's supposed to be complicated and unhealthy and toxic. And I think they walked such a beautifully fine line between showing that complexity, the manipulation, the trauma bonding, all the ways in which Ciri's fragile mental state definitely made her vulnerable to that very unhealthy relationship, whilst also still showing the parts of it that were good or that seemed good at the time. We can see that whilst the relationship is toxic and unhealthy, they do both care about each other in their own way. Missile genuinely believes she's trying to protect Ciri in the only way she knows how, and it's controlling, but it's clearly done out of love. The candy floss scene was straight out of the book and done beautifully. It was really cute. I like the fact that we get a bit of that back and forth, that Ciri starts pushing back and we kind of get that flirtation. And I absolutely adored the scene in which Missile asks Ciri what she wants, and she says she doesn't want to be alone, and that not being alone is everything to her. I heard in an interview that Freya Allen fought to get that specific scene and those specific book lines into the show, and I'm so glad she did, because I think they sum up their relationship and Ciri's attitude towards it so well. I also just thought the acting in episode one was spectacular. You can see so clearly Ciri's hesitation warring with the desperation to have someone, anyone, when Missile first propositions her. You can tell she doesn't really know what she's signing up for, and you can also see the moment that she decides to hang on to Missile as her remedy against that loneliness. You also get this lovely development across the season as Ciri grows in confidence and begins to call Missile out on her behaviour, and as Missile begins to learn that Ciri can stand on her own 2 feet, actually. All the effort they put into these relationships as well just really comes in clutch in that final episode because it's so brutal and heart wrenching when the rats are killed, and you can feel viscerally Ciri's grief and horror. And I think the work they did to make these characters feel human is what really makes that work because even if we personally don't like them and agree with their decisions, we can understand that Ciri does, and we can see why she does. Obviously, circling back to Ciri, her individual development was also just fantastic this season. I really liked her slowly realizing that the rats are, in fact, both kids and idiots, and that for the first time in her life, she's with a group of people that she's on even ground with. They aren't trying to control her, they aren't potential parental figures, they're castaways just like her, and they make mistakes. The you have nothing scene in which they officially accepted her as a rat was so good, and the symbolism of them each giving her a piece of them was really fantastic. One of my favourite moments, however, is actually when the rats raid the noblewoman's caravan, and the lady, who I believe is the daughter of the Duke of Cassaday, mocks Ciri, saying that she has more than Ciri could ever dream of. And this being the moment that Ciri really seems to snap and does lean into that kind of cruel, mocking nature of being a rat is just so masterful. Because you can see Ciri, who had more wealth and privilege than probably anyone else on the continent, realize just how foolish this woman's outlook on life is, and by extension, how foolish and naive her past self was. You can see the shift from my job is to save people to the world is tough, and so the weak should learn to toughen up. She fully rejects that past part of herself, and you can just watch it happening in her mindset in real time. It's great. I also love the way that her look changed throughout the season to reflect what she was going through, as well as just her taking more agency over her appearance and who she wants to be. The haircut was so good. I loved it. I quite like the makeup as well, and I'm just going to have so much fun drawing her now. I also really enjoyed the way this season highlighted Ciri's priorities as well, because for all she's happy to fall in with the rat and she's desperately trying to find this new life for herself, she still isn't able to forget her past. She still has lines she's drawn, and the minute the rats crossed one by revealing that they work for Nilfgaard, she finds the strength to stand up for herself and leave. She chooses not to be Cirilla, but not to be Falca either, and kind of starts to forge herself into something new. We see her taking control of her own actions and decisions for kind of the first real time. She's completely on her own, and she's okay with that. I also just think the whole arc was beautifully done. Ciri's fights were incredible. The costuming was delightful. They really made the most of the rats being bright and colourful. I love the coat thing Missile wears. I'm going to have so much fun drawing that. And like I said, there was just a beautiful nuance to the characterizations that I really adored. It sets Ciri up really well for a final season. I think she's arguably at her lowest point in the story by the end of season 4. She has lost everything. Nothing she holds on to is ever something she's able to keep, and I just can't wait to see how that guides her arc going forwards. We have the Hansa, and I am not going to lie, the Hansa is what I was looking forward to the most going into this season, and it delivered. The chemistry between the entire Hansa, but especially the core 5 members of Geralt, Jaskier, Milva, Cahir, and Regis, was just absolutely impeccable. Of course, we already saw Milva and Jaskier interact in season 3, and their dynamic was near perfect, so I wasn't too worried about how this was going to go. Joey Beatty could probably have chemistry with a potted plant if he tried, so, it was going to be good. But that said, seeing it all actually come together was phenomenal. I don't think we could have asked for a better cast, and yes, I am including Liam Hemsworth in that. He stepped into the role seamlessly, and I think he gave a great performance. It genuinely didn't even faze me at all, Geralt suddenly having a slightly different face than he did in the previous seasons. It was great. I also think that having those dream sequences in episode 2 and the flashbacks in episode 1 was a brilliant way to both cement the change of actors and also to get him some more screen time with Ciri and Yen to help kind of solidify those relationships and remind the audience that different actor, same character. He's the same guy. The dream sequences in particular were just so sweet and wholesome, him dreaming about them growing old together, and do not even get me started on the flashback of Geralt braiding Ciri's hair and her knighting him as Geralt Roger Eric de Harpagard. It was just an amazing detail. I loved that. I was giggling and kicking my feet. Geralt and Regis also had a really lovely relationship. I think Lawrence Fishburne gave a fantastic performance. He embodied the character so well, and I love the sort of mentor role that Regis took on within the group, especially towards Geralt. I also absolutely loved his specific flashback from the Joy of Cooking episode. The limited animation style they used was absolutely gorgeous, and it was such a genius idea to use it so that they could get the level of horror and gore Regis' story needed, as well as to get a younger version of Regis without having to like cast bonus actors and things. I thought it was great. I loved the multimedia kind of style to that episode as a whole. And yeah, the animation was so cool. I would have killed to have worked on that project, and I just have such admiration for the craft of it. However, I'd argue that all of Geralt's relationships felt better developed this season. It's partly because of the place he's at in the story, I think. The Baptism of Fire as a book is in part about Geralt realizing he needs people, so naturally that was going to bleed through into the storytelling, but it also helped that we've gotten a much more verbose, witty, emotive Geralt than we have had in previous seasons. There was a humanity to him that we didn't really have before, and he really embodied that sense of fatherhood despite Liam not having had the chance to play all the previous story of Geralt becoming Ciri's father, but it made his motivations and convictions throughout the season so much stronger. Seeing how that bolstered those around him as well, Milva, Yarpen, Zoltan, who was an incredible addition. I also loved the parrot. What do you mean? They trained a parrot for this show. And it really just helped pull the whole Hansa together, and yeah, it was just fantastic. Finally, on Geralt's relationships, before we move on, it was also lovely to see a marked improvement on his friendship with Jaskier. Season 3 definitely did what it could to try and paint over the damage that Season 1 had done to their supposed decade long friendship. But whilst they seemed much more comfortable with each other in Season 3, it was still a lot of Jaskier following Geralt around, albeit with a few more thanks involved. Jaskier's personal storyline still felt very separate from what the main plot was up to, and we didn't really get the impression that Geralt actually knew anything about what Jaskier did when he wasn't around. This season, however, it all felt a lot more equal. We got a Geralt who cares about Jaskier's opinions, listens to him. Characters like Milva were specifically asking Jaskier for help in convincing Geralt of certain motives and decisions because they know Jaskier has sway over him. And he seemed to care not just about someone getting injured on his watch, but about specifically making the time to make sure that Jaskier is okay and he had time to recover, with a bit of prompting from Milva again. Which is frankly vital given that this is the first time we've really seen Jaskier hit his breaking point. His ability to bolster and motivate everyone else got completely shattered this season. And by extension, he kind of lost the thing that is what makes him valuable to the Hansa on the journey. So having Geralt and the Hansa be able to still care and to help him get that back is really important. You know, he's more than just his value to the group, he's Geralt's friend. And I really like that. He looked out for Jaskier, he stole him some boots, he consoles him when he gets his heart broken, and gets angry at Valdemar on his behalf. Season 1 Geralt could never, and I am just so glad with this improvement. It feels like their friendship is finally where it probably should have been since the first season. The biggest surprise for me, however, was definitely Cahir. Cahir's been in the show since the beginning, and whilst he had scenes with both Jaskier and Geralt in seasons 2 and 3, respectively, he has, until this point, been more of an antagonist than anything else. So I was interested to see exactly how he was going to slot into the Hansa, and to be honest, I really should not have worried. I think it definitely helps that we've seen more of his character development in the show than we ever did in the books. But even still, his dynamic with all of them this season was so good. The slow kind of building up of forgiveness and trust between him and Geralt after, initially a very rocky start, the way he kind of banters with like Regis and Jaskier and Yarpen and Zoltan, but especially with Milva. Anytime Keir and Milva were on screen together, I was loving it. They took such good care of each other and they were clearly looking out for each other. And yeah, it was just beautiful. And speaking of Cahir and Milva, the book accuracy in the Hansa arc, everything from the Not Nilfgaardian quote to the introductions of Regis and Cahir in the coffins and the graveyards, to the refugee camp, Zoltan and his discussions of goodness and the way you can't be good to everyone, the battle on the bridge over the Yaruga, Queen Maeve, it was all just so well done and so well adapted. I was surprised to realise actually just how much they'd kept in. I half expected them to sort of shy away from things like Milva's pregnancy storyline, or Geralt stepping in to save that girl who was being assaulted in the first episode. But they told these stories with so much love and care and just really took what was in the books and elevated it and did it so well. Overall, I think the Hansa went in really hard on the found family themes, more so than I think either of the other two storylines, although obviously with Ciri that's a little bit because that found family was always going to be kind of toxic. And it just shows through beautifully. I was genuinely upset when Yarpen and Percival decided to leave at the end of episode 7, especially because of the evolution of Yarpen's friendship with particularly Jaskier over the last 4 seasons. I'm so sad he's not going to be around anymore. My only real note on this entire arc, aside from a few Jaskier things and music things that I will be coming back to later, is that I wish we'd gotten a bit more time with Beata before episode 4. I was definitely aware of her presence before we reached the witch trials in episode 4, but I'm just not sure I really cared about her or was invested in her until about halfway through that episode, which made her death feel a little bit quick and sudden. But I also don't know if I would sacrifice any of the beautiful moments we got with Zoltan or Milva or Cahir in exchange for that. All in all, though, the Hansa absolutely delivered. Best bit of the whole season. I loved it. So next, I want to move on to Yennefer's storyline. And to be honest, this is where the review is going to start to get a little bit more critical, I suppose. That said, there were some brilliant things about this storyline. Yennefer stepping into that leadership position, her strength, her conviction as a mother was just fantastic. I think Annie Chalotra gave a phenomenal performance. I'm aware I'm saying this about everybody, but I enjoyed the season, okay? And I am still as much in love with Yennefer as ever. We really saw her evolution from season 3 continuing through this season. This is a woman who spent her whole life running from responsibility, striking out as a lone wolf, not wanting to trust anybody, not wanting to rely on anybody, and now she has to navigate a tricky world of having a bunch of people who all rely on her. Right out of the gate, I think it was really clever the way they had Vilgefortz manipulate Istrid to use the Book of Monoliths to find a way to block portals. It provided an immediate solution to the Yennefer isn't trapped in a statue, so what's to stop her just portaling Geralt and Nilfgaard loophole in a way that I thought was pretty fun and interesting and made enough sense that I'm totally fine with it. I really enjoyed the reveal that Vilgefortz was manipulating Istrid into thinking he'd been rescued, and it also immediately raised the stakes because the sorceresses were immediately limited and had nowhere to run. The fastest way to move on the continent is by portal. If you can't do that anymore, you are basically trapped. I did find it slightly odd that Vilgefortz seemed to be so reliant on Istrid to explain what Ciri's powers were and why she was so special. Nilfgaard's been looking for Ciri since before Ciri or anybody else knew what she could do, and in the books, it's Vilgefortz who helped Junie stage his death, which I presume is the same in the show, although it's not technically been revealed yet, so that he could set all of this in motion. So I kind of assumed that he knew most about her since he's been playing everybody since the very beginning. I guess he's just meant to be working off the various prophecies that are floating around and doesn't actually have the real information, and that's what he's trying to get out of Istrid. But it did feel a little bit jarring to see him on a bit of a back foot when it came to movement of knowledge and information. But speaking of stakes, I also think this arc did a really good job of setting them. The riots at the beginning of episode 1 felt very brutal, and it very much gave the sense that the sorceresses are trapped, that the continent has very much turned against them. I was devastated that Kira died quite so quickly because I loved her in season 3, but I have strong suspicions that that was because of scheduling issues with the actress, so I can't really be too mad about it. There were several other standout sorceresses this season, however, the first of which being Fringilla. I think Fringilla is arguably the sorceress who has the most character development, aside from Yennefer, and we really get to see that come through this season. She's tired, she's angry, she's fed up of being used, and for all her and Yennefer have never liked or trusted one another, she will do literally anything to take Emhyr down, even going into the trenches to spy on Vilgefortz. I really loved seeing her friendship with Yennefer begin to develop, and I also think that of all the mages this season, she had the most to do plot-wise, which definitely helped her character. That said, I really think she deserves to go at least one season without being tortured or imprisoned. I mean, poor girl has had it rough. I also loved the very light touch we got on her pre-existing relationship with Francesca, the way they kind of look at each other when Yennefer first summons the apparition of Fringilla into the room was so charged, and it is genuinely the thing that is giving me hope that these two might reconcile in season 5, because I love Fringilla and Francesca's relationship. I think it's so detailed and interesting, and I want more of it. I understand why we didn't have time to get more of it this season, but going forwards, please, more. And speaking of Francesca, she was also iconic this season. Right from the start with the Yennefer themed night at the brothel with like the unicorn and everything, which was absolutely hilarious. But the pain and grief that Francesca has been through in the last 2 seasons really shone through. She is point blank not having a good time, and I especially loved how it was Yennefer claiming Ciri as her daughter that was what convinced Francesca to join Yennefer and help her. I think it would have been easy to forget about Francesca's daughter, given that over the last season both her husband and her brother have now died. But the wider season theme of family, and specifically Yennefer's personal arc of motherhood, really were reflected in this decision from Francesca and really highlighted that at the end of the day, this is about looking out for your family and specifically for your kid. It was also just a lovely moment of evolution from Francesca, I think, from her realizing that Ciri isn't just Hennekeer. She isn't just the supposed elven savior. This is somebody's daughter. And she had a daughter like that who somebody tried to use for political gain once. And kind of that moment where she kind of goes, I'm going to see Ciri as a person now, and I'm going to help you because she's your daughter, not because she's special. And I just really liked that. I thought it was a really cool element to the character and to that interaction. My final favourite sorceress performance this season was Philippa. But this one does admittedly come with a caveat. I think Cassie Clare has such a strong presence as Philippa, and so many of her moments, especially in the fight scenes this season, looked so cool. I really enjoyed Yennefer being able to acknowledge that Philippa was right about Vilgefortz before any of them. And the way she takes Philippa as kind of her right hand person because of this is really great. However, I just wish they'd given Philippa more to do. Her exit from the Redanian storyline was frankly rather abrupt, and I will be talking about that later. And as such, I kind of expected it was because she would have a major effect on the Lodge and she was going to have lots to do in this storyline and they needed to free up time for that. Philippa's main goal for all of season 3 had been personal power and acknowledgement. So I was fully expecting her to try and wrestle control from Yennefer at some point or to outright demand it in exchange for sheltering the mages in Monte Calvo. But she never really did. She seemed kind of happy to take a back seat and let Yennefer mostly run things without her. Philippa's such a clever, cunning character with a clear drive for control, and yet that doesn't really seem to have come through this season. She was kind of just okay with, you know, hosting all these mages but not being in charge, and it just felt a little odd. We also didn't see any sign of the Philippa and Triss relationship romance developing, which I think I was also minorly disappointed by because I feel like maybe that could have done some work to potentially soften Philippa's image or give her a different set of priorities, and it would have maybe explained why she was happy to just go along with Yennefer's plans. Also, because, I would love more lesbian relationships in my fantasy TV shows, and as much as I enjoyed Ciri and Missel's dynamic, that was obviously not going to end well. Whereas, Philippa and Triss could actually have like an interesting there's a future there. To be honest, on the whole, I expected there to be a lot more internal conflict within the Lodge. Obviously, they have an external enemy to fight in Vilgefortz, but this is a group of women who have all been on opposite sides for 3 seasons. After what happened at Thaned, you really shouldn't be able to put Francesca, Fringilla, Philippa, and Yennefer all in a room together without some major consequences. It felt like the only person who even substantially rejected to any of Yennefer's plans was Margarita, when she refused to let Yennefer train the novices for battle, which, I mean, good for her, but why was nobody else kind of getting into that debate? Why was there not more distrust? There was just a complex layer that I felt was missing. I've always liked the political parts of The Witcher, so I am a little bit biased, but I think exploring some of those fraught dynamics in more detail would have been a better use of time than having an entire episode dedicated to the defense of Monte Calvo. I think they were maybe trying to recreate the effect of the Thaned coup episode in season 3, because the Thaned coup does all take place in one episode, and it's a fantastic episode. But the reason that it works so well in season 3 was because it had all of the politics to underpin it, and there was a lot going on just within that battle with all the different changing allegiances and the different revelations. It starts off with Philippa's coup, and then Vilgefortz reveals himself, and then we have the side stuff going on with Ciri and Geralt as they're trying to escape. Whereas this was just one very long battle that didn't have a lot of complexity to the politics and the relationships of it. Speaking of, We also need to talk about the inclusion of the witches in this storyline. I actually really enjoyed the concept of the sorceresses training in traditional weaponry to give them a second line of attack and help their magic last longer. It's a nice thing to give them an edge. It kind of breaks down this idea that magic trumps all, which has been very pervasive throughout the Brotherhood and Aretusa prior to this point. It's a new point of perspective. I liked it. I thought it was a cool move. The training scene between Yennefer and Francesca was very cool, and in theory, I think it was a good idea. It was also nice to see Sabrina's archery skills coming back from season 1. However, I do question whether the witches were the right way to go about this. Whilst I can definitely believe that the witches would be willing to break their neutrality to defend Ciri or to help end the war to protect her or other innocents, something which Cohen literally does in the book as he joins the war on the northern side to kind of help beat back Nilfgaard, I'm not sure, however, that I can really see them helping defend the mages specifically. Aside from Geralt, most witches hate mages and have a terrible relationship with them because the mages are the ones who created the witches. And none of them have a good relationship with Yennefer after season 2. And whilst I did enjoy some of her conversations with Vesemir about the responsibility of parenthood, I can't really believe that they would have actually come to help her. That said, I think maybe if we'd actually seen the scene in which Triss tries to convince them to help, that might have done something. Triss felt like she had very little to do this season, and since she does have a remarkably good relationship with the witches, and she's one mage that they all seem to trust, seeing her actually discuss it with them and sway them to come and help might have helped it feel more believable to me. But to be honest, what actually happened is it felt like the writers kind of went out of their way to bring the witches into this arc just so they could have the gut punch of killing Vesemir, which I found didn't actually land that well anyway. Partly because I was admittedly thrown by the change of actors, which once again is scheduling, so it's not their fault, but it was more jarring, I found, than replacing Geralt. But partly because I couldn't get over the fact that Yennefer could have killed Vilgefortz earlier in that fight, and she didn't. Surely, no information he could have had would have been worth letting him live. She was convinced Ciri was in Nilfgaard still, and it was obviously going to be 10 times easier to rescue Ciri without Vilgefortz around. She should have killed him when she had that chance. He was clearly too dangerous to be left alive, and since the writers obviously knew he needed to live until season 5, I just think that they shouldn't have given her that opportunity, because the fact that they did means she made a conscious choice to not kill him when she could, and if she had killed him, there would be absolutely no need for Vesemir to fight him. Plus, it didn't really feel like Vesemir's death had too many consequences, because it was sort of overshadowed by Geralt and Yennefer's reunion. It didn't hit as hard as it could have, because the only character who really cared about it happening were the other witches who we didn't see again after that point, and Geralt, who was dealing with a lot and therefore kind of just like, he looked sad for a minute and then moved on. And I just wish that maybe they'd cut the witches entirely and instead maybe had Francesca be the one to push that idea of training with real weaponry to the other sorceresses, because Francesca's got quite a different history to the rest of them. She has the skill set, she's been defending herself her whole life, and I think it would really help to reinforce that difference between her and the others, but also given her a real sense of additional value to the team. All of that said, because I'm aware that was quite critical, it was lovely to see Lambert and Cohen again. I do love both of them, and I presume that they are going to be in season 5 as well, and so this is meant to be, I think, the precursor to them coming in and doing some stuff in season 5, which I am looking forward to. So I will be thankful we got to see them again, but I wouldn't have done it this way. And in relation to this whole thing, I think we also have to talk about the season 4 deaths in this arc. This arc had the most deaths aside from the Rats storyline, which we kind of all knew was coming, because if you've read the books at all, you know the Rats all end up dead. And so this was definitely the arc with the most unexpected deaths, because aside from Vesemir, we also lost both Margarita and Istrid. Margarita I have mixed feelings on. It felt like, a bit like with Beata, we didn't quite get enough time with her to care about her as much as I feel like we should have, especially this season. I think she had almost more going on in season 3. But I do recognise that a battle of this scale needed to have a actual casualty of a character we know from the mages, and I think the fact that she died protecting her students is a nice touch. I think it probably could have been better if we'd maybe, let Kira live and then killed off somebody during this fight rather than having that death at the very beginning as well, but once again, I think the Kira thing was scheduling issues. I've also noticed now that with the death of both Margarita and Kira, Fringilla is now the only plus-sized sorceress left in the lodge or in the cast anywhere, which I do think is kind of a shame because I really enjoyed the fact that in season 3 we had such a wide range of body shapes among the mages, who were all meant to be these magnificent, beautiful women. And the fact that it's now just Fringilla and the rest of them are all very skinny, which, I mean, they're all beautiful, don't get me wrong. I feel like we've kind of killed off some of the diversity a little bit here, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Istrid, however, I feel better about. I think they did a really good job with his storyline. His death felt really emotional, especially because he'd spent all season trying to help Yennefer and failing because of Vilgefortz's deceit. And so to finally be able to make a difference to her worked really well. He was kind of able to redeem himself from the accidental mistakes he'd made. The throwback to season 1 with the lines about the fresh bread and the cicadas was also just a lovely touch. And I may be slightly smug about the fact that I did predict this death in my theory video. I didn't get a lot right, but I did get this right. And it didn't happen exactly the way I thought it would, but I'm kind of proud of it. And I do think that this one in particular worked really well and did feel like it had that emotional impact that you want from a character death. Finally, I just wish we'd gotten slightly more time with Yennefer meeting the Hansa, because I was really looking forward to that scene. It's a dynamic we never get to see in the books because Yennefer is locked in a statue for most of the time Geralt's with the Hansa, and it ended up being so short, and it would just been so interesting to see her dynamic with some more of those Hansa characters. She barely even said 2 words to Jaskier, who she's known for 10 years at this point. And I just wish we had a bit more time for that, but time constraints, I get it. I suppose my overall reaction to Yennefer's arc this season is that it had good stuff in it. It had all the right ingredients to be really fun and interesting. It just didn't feel like it was executed especially well. It had a lot of potential it didn't quite live up to. I think they put the emphasis on the wrong parts of the story. But that said, it was still vastly preferable to Yennefer being stuck inside of a statue all season. And I'm very excited to see what they do with the new lodge going forwards. I also want to give an obligatory shout out to Asa for being absolutely iconic with her sparkly witch's hat and her attitude. She was hilarious. I loved her. Great addition, no notes. With the main storylines done, I now want to talk about a few of the things going on around the edges. And I want to start with the Redanian Intelligence plotline. Because, to be honest, I had such high expectations for this, and it really seemed to fall short. Season 3 spent so much time building up this complex web of relationships of distrust between Philippa and Dijkstra and Radovid. They were all in at least 7 of the 8 episodes, and then for all of that work to come undone in a 2-minute scene at the beginning of season 4 felt really disappointing. Philippa and Dijkstra's relationship ended in one very brief conversation in which Dijkstra expressed his distrust of her and reminded her that the North has no trust for mages anymore. And then we never really saw either of their reactions to the ending of this several decade long friendship that they'd had. Whilst Dijkstra does threaten to tell Radovid who killed Vizimir, it's never actually revealed whether Radovid was able to figure it out on his own. We never really get to see any development of Dijkstra's control over Radovid beyond the threats he made in season 3, and we also never even see Radovid's reaction to Philippa leaving Redania either. For those of you who don't know, I studied animation at university, and in my 3rd year we spent almost the whole year making short films. During the process of that, as the deadline started to approach, a lot of people were running out of time, and so one of my jobs on various projects was going around and editing people's rough draft films down to be as short as possible, while still maintaining all of the essential story beats so that they made sense as a story, in the hope that we'd have a finished version of the film, albeit a slightly shorter one. And that's kind of what feels like happened with this storyline. The essential plot points are all still there. We can see the progression from Philippa leaving to Radovid and his drinking problem and the disrespect the Northern Mages are showing him, to him having no control over his army, to the conversation he has with Jaskier, and to how that eventually motivates him to cut Dijkstra loose. But it feels like all of the context and the contextual events around it that would have made those moments hit really hard has just kind of been stripped back and peeled away. And funnily enough, it has since come out that Graham McTavish, who plays Dijkstra, was offered a role on another film that conflicted with the season 4 filming. A lot of his scenes were brought forwards in the schedule to before they filmed most of the first 3 episodes, specifically the scene where he tortures Geralt, but presumably the others as well. And Lauren Hissrich actually admits that they had to manufacture an exit for him in episode 4, implying that Dijkstra wasn't actually supposed to leave the series quite this early. She did also imply he might be back in season 5, but that's a whole separate conversation. So they clearly had to rewrite quite large portions of this storyline on quite short notice, and also had limited time to film the scenes they did have with Dijkstra in them. Hence, I think why everything feels quite abrupt. If you've only got so much time, they'll have crammed in the important points to make the story happen, and those kind of reactive scenes that might have showed us some of the context around it got cut. It doesn't necessarily make the story better, but it does definitely explain a lot of what happened and give me more hope for season 5. It would also explain why I felt the strongest scene in the Redanian storyline was the Radovid and Jaskier reunion in episode 4, as that scene is the least dependent on Philippa and Dijkstra, beyond the acknowledgement that Radovid is terrified of them both and clearly not brave enough to openly contradict Dijkstra, even for Jaskier's sake. That said, I do also think the reason why this scene was so strong is that Joey and Hugh's chemistry is just completely off the charts. They clearly worked really hard to make that scene count, given it was the only one they got. It hurt viscerally to watch that relationship come undone at the seams, and yet I found I couldn't help but empathise with Radovid, despite his many bad choices, because he was clearly trapped in a corner and was clinging to Jaskier like a lifeline to try and get him out of it, which obviously Jaskier couldn't do. He was never going to leave the Hansa. That said, I do think there were still some scenes missing that they could have put in that wouldn't have been reliant on Dijkstra. Specifically, some kind of reaction from Radovid to the revelation that Jaskier and Geralt escaped during the raid of the Northern Army camp. We have no indication as to whether he even knew about their impending executions, although it does seem unlikely he knew given the lack of integration with the Cintran troops. Nor is it clear whether he intended to set them free or renegotiate the terms of their imprisonment after he finally stood up for himself against Dijkstra and took control again. For all he knows, Jaskier could have been killed in that battle. In fact, he nearly was. And some reaction to that would have really helped clarify his motives, I think. Because from what I've observed, half the fandom now seem to think that he's on a path to becoming a ruthless villain like his game counterpart, although I will say for the 100th time, the show is not based on the games. And the other half are really pinning their hopes on him redeeming himself somehow in season 5 now that he's finally free of Dijkstra's control. So whatever happens, a big group of people are going to be disappointed. And I just think that extra clarity would have been really useful. I do obviously have my own theories and opinions on what I think is going to happen with Radovid's character, but I'm not going to discuss them here because that is a whole separate video, which I may actually make even though I think 3 people are going to watch it. Mostly, I'm just hoping that having had more time to plan season 5, regardless of if Graham McTavish can come back as Dijkstra again, the extra time and planning will hopefully mean that the storyline will be much better going forward and be better executed going forward. The one political storyline I really was enjoying, however, was everything going on with Emhyr and Skellen and Teryn, also known as the False Ciri. It was really fascinating to see Emhyr on the back foot after Vilgefort's betrayal, which I also called, and I am so happy I was right about. And watching him slowly realise that Teryn is not in fact his daughter was very fun. They also went in hard with the whole Emhyr wanting to have a child with his own daughter thing, which I thought they might skirt around slightly, but they really committed to it, and it works so well to help villainize this guy and show that beneath all the charm, he really is a nasty piece of work. In fact, I would argue he's much more interesting and unsettling villain than Vilgefortz in some ways, because he's got that kind of charm. He's clearly able to win people over to his side while still doing terrible things, and then yet there's all of this underneath it. It's freaky. And then you add Skellen into the mix. I don't know if I just really like medieval politics and the games of manipulation that spy masters play, but I found it fascinating watching him pull the strings to try put both Emhyr and the noble lords exactly where he wanted them. He has to be the only man on the entire continent who couldn't care less about Ciri's powers, which is very interesting. And they definitely made it clear that he's kind of clever and cunning, and it showed through his actions, which I think is always the hardest bit of writing clever characters. It's one thing to say someone's clever, but to actually have them be clever is a completely different kettle of fish. I also really love Teryn. She's this broken shell of a character ripped from Aretuza, which we all know was never an especially nurturing place, tortured by Vilgefortz, stolen from Annika, and then forced to play princess. And whilst it was definitely meant to be done in manipulation, watching Skellen hand her the tools to take her own power in this situation was really fun to watch.
Having that power for the first time, then making her strong enough to want to reject Yennefer's offer of safety, to reject being a mage or an experiment, and to take her chances with Emhyr was like a really cool turn of events. There's also a clever cut right before Yennefer leaves Nilfgaard, which does imply that while she chose to stay in the castle, she might have given Yennefer some information to help her find Ciri first, kind of showing that she is conspiring against Emhyr as well to help maintain her own position. I think watching the way the three of them interact going into season 5 is going to be really interesting.
Heck, this is a long video. If anyone is still watching, you are my new favorite person. I cannot believe you made it this far. Let's make it to the end together, alright? Because finally I want to talk about the music. Obviously, music has been a big part of the show since season 1, and I do think it therefore needs a discussion. The overall soundtrack was great. I love the subtle strands of extraordinary things playing in the background of Radovid and Jaskia's scene, and I know there's probably a dozen other tiny details like that that I haven't picked up on yet because I'm not a very musical person. This season also had two songs with lyrics that weren't performed on screen by any characters or anything. I believe one of them was original and the other is like a needle drop. But honestly, despite having not had any non in world songs since season 1, I didn't mind either of these. They didn't feel jarring, they worked really well in the scenes they were in. They were cool, they were decent. The one I really want to talk about, and the reason why I've added a whole music section to this video, is Jaskia's musical flashback. Because I was so excited for this, and I have a lot of thoughts. On the one hand, I thought the concept was amazing. The idea that, of course, Jaskia would sing his story to the group and that his memories of events would have that dramatic, performative touch to them makes a lot of sense. The set was great, the costuming was incredible, the choreography looked fantastic, and I really loved the use of colour to reflect Jaskia's mental state throughout the two different kind of halves of that story. The actual song was underwhelming. They'd clearly tried to parody classical musical theatre songs in some way. The opening bit of it was very reminiscent of like the opening to Beauty and the Beast for some reason, and there were some sections in the middle that were obviously very similar to bits of Les Mis. I'm sure there were other similarities in there that I just didn't pick up on because I hadn't heard the right musicals, but it all just made it feel a little bit cliche. I think my major problem is that it didn't sound like Jaskia or the world of The Witcher very much. The one section that I thought was pretty brilliant was near the end of the song, in which Valdo does his performance to the tune of All Is Not As It Seems, and we get Jaskia's kind of harmonies over the top of that as he's kind of contradicting what Valdo's saying. That was fantastic. If we'd had more of that, either original music or even just taking previous Jaskia songs and making a medley of sorts out of them, I just think that would have made it feel so much more grounded in the world. It would have felt like something Jaskia might have actually written. And none of this is to say that I think the actors didn't sing it well. They sung it brilliantly. I just think the music itself was lacking. And after getting 5 fantastic, unique, original in world songs in season 3, it felt like a little bit of a letdown that this was the only song we got. I also found that it didn't really tell me that much about Yaskia that I didn't already know. The theory that Valdo Marx stole some of Jaskia's music has been around since season 1, and whilst it was nice to have it confirmed, pretty much everybody had already accepted that as canon. Jaskia's arc this season was supposed to be about wanting his music to live on after him, and whilst reclaiming his stolen works does sort of play into that a little bit, I feel like we could have maybe gotten more mileage out of a story about how he became a bard, or the moment he realised the power music can have after one's death. This would have been a great time to bring up Essie again after the Sirens of the Deep film and learn about her fate if you want to go with her book canon fate. And kind of see Jaskia's reaction to that and see how that's shaped him in the way he's acting now, because Jaskia is very much getting in the thick of the war and everything and is getting very much involved in things that are a bit bigger and scarier than he is, and that would be a really cool explanation as to why. Alternatively, if they wanted to stick with Valdo Marx, which I do love Valdo Marx to be fair, this flashback could have somehow tied into his storyline with Radovid. What if Radovid wasn't the first lover to take advantage of his affections to betray him, but there was also a romantic element to that history with Valdo? Then this scene would really be valuable context for why Jaskier struggles so much to put himself in Radovid's shoes in a way that he doesn't as much with characters like Yennefer and Geralt. Essentially, it just felt like everybody else's flashbacks told us something really crucial about them in episode 5, or in Cahir and Milva's case, set up parts of the plot that were going forwards. But Yaskis just didn't seem to hit quite as hard. All that said, though,
I do adore Jaskier as a character, and I therefore might just be getting a little bit nitpicky about it because I had very specific ideas in my head, and obviously this was slightly different to those specific ideas. I actually do think they did a decent job with it. It could have been more. In conclusion, I thought season 4 of The Witcher was absolutely fantastic overall. Yes, there were things that maybe weren't perfect, but as far as the main storylines and character relationships go, I think they did a brilliant job. I've watched the show through twice now, and I still absolutely love it. The Witcher has kind of been through the ringer a bit in regards to feedback from fans over the last several years. They faced a load of production issues, they've had to change a bunch of their cast, things, kind of beyond their control. And the fact that they've managed to produce such a fun, exciting season of television is frankly kind of remarkable. I honestly cannot wait to see how this goes forward and develops in season 5, and I'm already planning and looking forward to making a video of theories about season 5 when we get there, which admittedly will be in probably about a year's time from now. So, I really hope you enjoyed this video if you actually made it to the end. I can't believe it took this long. But thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I will be back to talk to you all again soon. Bye.